Good morning. Good morning. I decided to hop on YouTube and make another quick video again. I'm going to try to be a little quicker than the one I put out yesterday, but um, I wanted to respond to, I think his name's Andrew Stephen Walter. He made a video in regard to the controversy surrounding Gail Gadot and her being cast for the role of Cleopatra. So once again, I wanted to add my 2 cents in regard to some things that Mr. Walter said in his video, because this is part of the issue of misinformation circulating on the internet in regards to ancient Egypt, specifically, history, culture, and civilization. So I wanted to clarify a few things once again. Mr. Walter made a few statements that I strongly disagree with, and he also he didn't really provide any supporting evidence that Egypt was a multiracial or multicultural society. And there are so many reasons just why that couldn't be true. From a historical, or based on historical evidence and archaeological evidence, that just simply could not be true. So obviously there's what I would consider to be a schism, with Egyptological enthusiasts. There are those who are proponents of or are in favor of Egypt being a homogeneous civilization, or an African civilization. And then there are those who are in favor of Egypt being a multiracial or multi-ethnic civilization with I guess you could say, a Caucasian ruling class. So let's put it that way. That's the schism right there. Or separate schools of thought, if you want to put it that way. So I wanted to lay out some additional facts here, in addition to the things that I mentioned in my video previously yesterday. So like I said yesterday, going back to the pre-dynastic period, which is from 5300 to 3000 BC, you have several different cultures in pre-dynastic Egypt. You have the Tessian, the Gurzian, the Badarian, and then you have the semi-nomadic pastoral cattle herders, or the cattle herders that lived on the outskirts of Egypt in the deserts and would migrate to the savannas to let their herds graze. But so the dynastic Egyptians were descendants of the Badarian and the cattle herders that lived in the Egyptian eastern and western desert. So from very early on, Egypt's population was established from those two groups, the cattle herders and the valley dwellers, or the Badarians who live in the floodplains in Egypt, over in the Nile, because they were agriculturalists and cultivating cereal grains, and were more of a sedentary people, known for their pottery and things like that. So dynastic Egyptians came from them. And then looking into the physical anthropology of ancient Egypt, while there are distinctions that are made, morphologically between Upper and Lower Egyptians, Egypt has been always been viewed by scholars as being a racially homogenous country and civilization. It was never this multiracial or multi-ethnic country, and that couldn't even be true just for somebody who spent time, such as myself, studying ethnography and ethnology um, as it pertains to ancient Egypt or and the Egyptians. Um, Nothing about the ancient Egyptian culture is, there's no multi-ethnic anything about it. Now, are we going to say that the Egyptians never borrowed or adopted any, let's say, some of their military technology from, the Near East, Mesopotamia, or even the Mediterranean? No, I'm not going to say that, because there is actually archaeological evidence to support that. But, the adoption of technology or diffusion is very different from, borrowing maybe certain customs or beliefs from a different culture. So when we are talking about Egyptian culture, we are essentially talking about their customs and their beliefs, which are not congruent with those of the Near East or Mesopotamia, excuse me, the Near East or the Mediterranean. And I'm specifically, when I refer to the Mediterranean, I'm really talking about Minoan civilization and Mycenae. So that's the part of the Mediterranean that I'm talking about. So the whole Sidelic culture and civilization in the ancient Mediterranean, or the ancient Aegean. So I strongly disagree with Andrew Stephen Walter, I believe his name is. I strongly agree with him for that reason. Of course, there is other archaeological evidence, such as the Semna Stele, which the Egyptians, I believe, set up at the border of Egypt. And I believe that the Semna Stele was a commemorative stele talking about the campaigns of Senusret III in Sudan. And I'm not sure if it was set up by Senusret himself during his reign, or if it came afterward. I would have to, refresh some of my knowledge on that. But the stele was basically a cautionary warning to the Egyptians that they were not to cross the border between Egypt and Sudan, and that if they were to cross that, if they did cross the border, that they would be, basically they would be, they were going to experience again, what the Egyptians had already done in the Sudan, and so this is why it was put there as a warning to the Nubians that, do not cross this line. Of course, that didn't stop the Nubians from crossing that line, because then the 25th dynasty comes later on. But you also have the victory stele of Kamos. You also have the victory stele of Kamos, which talks about his expulsion of the Hyksos. The Hyksos were in Egypt, I think, pretty much since just before the end of the third intermediate period, which lasted from 650 to 1550, and then on into the New Kingdom. You had that whole battle going on between the Egyptians and the Hyksos. We have, of course, the inscription about the Egyptian general Ibana, who I believe was part of that whole military, that war between the Egyptians and the Hyksos, and trying to expel them from the country, because they had set up their own kingdom in northern Egypt, which is Lower Egypt. So You have that, and again, so my point is that Egypt was not a multiracial or multi-ethnic society, like Mr. Walter tries to, make Egypt out to be this multiracial and multi-ethnic society. And he's not for the, as he puts it, the we was kangs, and Egypt was ruled by blacks. And now, of course, my view is that Egypt was an African civilization, and of course, it was ruled by blacks. It was ruled by particularly those that were of the Afro-Asiatic group of sub-Saharan Africans, or the Egyptians would be related to the Afro-Asiatic speaking, and even the Nilo-Saharan speaking tribes in Eastern Africa, such as the Afar in Ethiopia, and the other tribes in Kenya, like the Watutsi. The Egyptians were definitely related to those groups of people, and it's of course no surprise with my kind of study and research that those just those two tribes I mentioned, the Afar and the Watutsi, were classified as Hamites, going back to the 20th century. So that, of course, is no surprise. But I also wanted to point out the fact that, civilizations in the ancient world were extremely xenophobic. Of course, I won't equate, ancient civilizations, and as far as their attitude or what their perspective was on race, with what ours is in the 21st century. But you could just take Greece, for example. The Spartans and the Athenians lived in completely different societies. Their political systems were very different. Their cultures were very different in terms of their views on things. Yet these were both Greek people, but they did not live integrated. They lived segregated from each other. And so the ancient world was not this, hodgepodge, multi-culti sort of place. It was not. It was definitely not that. The Egyptians, likewise, were, they had epithets or disparaging terms such as vile Libyans, vile Kush, which is talking about Sudan, vile Asiatics, which is talking about the tribes and people that lived in Jordan, Syria, Palestine, and Israel. These people were considered by the Egyptians as vile. There's images of Seti the First in relief, where he's stomping on a Libyan soldier in battle and is smiting him with the spear. He's pointing the spear downward, getting ready to stab his Libyan foe. So this idea that the Egyptians were, just this multiracial, just, everybody was just welcome, is just, it's so far from reality. Yeah, of course. Did the Egyptians have trade with other civilizations that were contemporary with their own, like the Minoans in Crete? Yeah, absolutely they did. But that's very different from saying that, the Egyptians were, they didn't have, just like you do today in the US, they didn't have tight immigration policies, or that the Egyptians were somehow, they were these open border, type people, and they didn't believe in, what people still believe in today, having strong or tight immigration laws and restrictions and policies that prevent people from crossing a certain line and just illegally invading your country. You know, that's definitely not the case in ancient history. So I have no idea where Mr. Walter gets his perspective from in regards to ancient Egyptian civilization, but the Egyptians were not open border, you know, come one, come all type people. So that's definitely not an accurate picture of ancient Egypt. And like I said yesterday in my other video, Gail Gadot playing Cleopatra, I don't necessarily have an issue with her being cast for the role. I don't think she could carry the role. She doesn't, to me, she doesn't look like she could, but maybe she could. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe she has the acting ability to be able to play Cleopatra. But at the same time, like I said, I'm more concerned about who would play Mark Antony, who would play Julius Caesar, who would play Octavius. I'm more concerned about that because, you know, like I said, I don't want to see some English white guy play Julius Caesar or Octavius or Marcus Antonius. I don't want to see that because that's not accurate representation of ancient Romans either, which is why I absolutely loathe and have nothing but disdain for HBO's Rome, which was horrible. So as far as its casting choices, yeah, it was a horrible show. And then top that off with the modern English accents, which don't even fit in that time period. So that's definitely was a major anachronism that shouldn't have even been, you know, that just shouldn't even have been. But yeah, anyway, back to the subject of whether or not ancient Egypt was a multiracial civilization. Just based on the archaeological evidence, like I said, from the Victory Stele of Combos, the Semna Stele, I believe that the Egyptians built some forts. They actually built a fort down in Semna as well. I believe they had a fort built somewhere in Canaan at a certain point. They had a fort built, you know, and all of these facilities, you know, military facilities and buildings were put in place, you know, to prevent people from just being able to, you know, have easy access, like say into the Sinai desert, or, you know, being able to cross over into Egypt. So the Egyptians put things in place. You know, they had measures that they put in place in order to prevent people from just, you know, crossing over into their country. So yeah, I don't agree with the view that ancient Egypt was a multicultural, multiracial society. They definitely were a homogenous society, and that's why you see the same depictions in their artwork for 3,000 years, you know, from the Old Kingdom, 2686, all the way down to the end of the New Kingdom in 1069. So again, I don't know. I just don't know where people got this idea that Egypt was a multicultural civilization. I've never come across that in any literature. That's definitely not the consensus or the view of scholars, that Egypt was a multiracial civilization. You know, the Egyptians, yeah, they did hire or recruit foreign mercenaries to fight in the military, but that doesn't suggest that they had those people live in the country for, you know, long periods of time. So anyway, that's kind of my rebuttal to uh, Mr. Walter, um, who I think his interpretation of ancient Egypt is very, very wrong. Um, and yeah, so that's all I'm going to say on that subject for now. So hope you enjoyed the commentary, and let me know what you think in the comments down below. Signing off.